Cloud. Okay, we want to welcome everyone to Zoom. Okay, we're all set. My name is Nancy Wilson, and I had started Westport CT Book Chat and Swap, and we're here today with Jen Blankfein from Book Nation Book Club and Shelby Van Pelt, the author of Remarkably Bright Creatures. We're so excited to have her here. Both Jen and I heard from so many people that they were so excited to have Shelby here. The book has gotten just wonderful accolades, and people are really, really talking about this book. We are recording this, so we wanted to let you know that. And also, we want you guys to feel free to ask any questions that you might have. So probably based on the amount of participants, it would be best if you put those in the chat, and I can let Shelby and Jen know that you would like to ask some questions. So without further ado, Jen, you're up.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nancy, and welcome everybody. On behalf of all of you, we welcome Shelby Van Pelt, who, as Nancy said, has been in demand, and really thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here. So let's just get right into it, because there's a lot to talk about here. Remarkably Bright Creatures is your debut novel, and it was published earlier this year and chosen as a Read with Jenna pick for May. It's become a New York Times bestseller. It's been recognized by Good Housekeeping and lots of other entities. So you really knocked it out of the park. First book out, which is amazing. So congratulations to you.
Oh, thank you.
Based on your bio, you were born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and now you're living in Chicago with your husband and 2 children. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and did you always want to be a writer? When did you start writing?
You know, I didn't really come to fiction writing until I was my 30s. You know, I always liked writing as a kid. I did a lot of writing in more of kind of a journalism type capacity. You know, I was editor of my high school paper, that sort of thing. But I never really considered myself a super creative person until I, kind of found myself, like I said, early 30s, living in a new city, and decided to take this fiction writing class at Emory University. I know I saw someone that's from Atlanta in the chat.
Actually, my son is at Emory right now. He's a junior.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so this was it's like the continuing education. So it's non-credit. It's just like this, it was an evening class, but I basically thought, well, this might be a good way to meet people. I've always liked writing. I'll try creative writing, fiction writing, and see how it goes. And it was really in that class that Marcellus was sort of born, out of a writing exercise there. And I kind of got hooked on it from there. Over the next several years, I continued to participate in critique groups with some of the people that I had met in that class, which was just awesome, and so instrumental to actually continuing down the road and eventually getting to a finished book. There's no way I could have done it without my critique partners. So yeah, that kind of is what pushed me to get started. And now it's gone from being a hobby to a job or career, which is, kind of every writer's dream. So I feel extremely lucky to be here.
What was your job? Did you have a job before this?
Yeah, I had a very boring job. I worked in kind of, it's called litigation consulting, which is, it's like a form of kind of financial consulting where we would do like damages analysis in lawsuits, and it was a lot of Excel sheets in an office job. And oddly enough, one of the things that I did take away from that job was, though the Excel models were okay, but I actually really liked writing the reports that went with them. And these were like expert witness reports that would get used in court. So there was a little bit of room to kind of be, have some, not creativity really, but just to put some flair in the writing, I guess I should say, persuasive type writing. So, that was another
in that report.
Unfortunately not, although we did, it was funny. I learned so much about so many different industries because, these cases would just come to us from various different random lawsuits, and it'd be like, all right, well, we're learning about like tractors today.
Okay, everything leads to something, so you never know how that will benefit you in your writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, how long did it take you to write the whole book?
So I always say by one measure, it took several years, like, the better part of a decade. If you measure it from sort of start to finish, it was, I think, the early 2000 teens, maybe 2013 or 14, when I was doing that class in Atlanta at Emory, and when I had the idea and sort of took off with just writing like some scenes and like a couple of first chapters. And then I did something over the next several years, which I think a lot of writers do, is I kind of kept writing the first 2 chapters over and over again. So instead of, moving forward, I would go, week after week to these workshops and these critique groups and just bring an updated version of the, thing I brought last week. Here's chapter 1 again. Look at how much better I made the intro. And that's not a productive thing to do, although I think it's a very tempting thing to do because it's sort of safe, right? Like, and I even find myself doing that now. I'm trying to work on a second book, and I'll open up the file and I just go right there like, oh, chapter 2, let's see how we can tweak this. It's like, no, we need to move forward. So it was about like 2019 when I figured that I needed to actually move forward. And I had a longtime critique partner and good friend who was sort of in the same boat with her novel, of having worked on it for many years, but never sort of made it out of the first act. And so we made a pact that we were going to finish our novels. And like, this was late 2019. So we were all like, 2020, it's going to be our year. It's going to be so great, like best year ever. And so I apologize if we jinxed that for anyone. But, and it was, 2020 was a very difficult year for obvious reasons, but it was also a very like good writing year for me. And I did finish the novel about 9 months later. So that was a very long-winded answer to the question of how long it took. So it took like 9 years, but 9 months. It depends on how you measure it.
I think it shows that it can take a lot of time.
Yeah.
That's the answer, really. It just takes a lot of time to get that first book out.
Well, and it's not always linear, for me, maybe it is for some people, but for me, it was very much fits and starts, and then, like a big push at the end. And I was pretty burned out at the end of it. I mean, it was intense for those sort of 9 months. So.
And then how did you find a publisher?
Pretty traditional way of doing it. I just cold queried agents, and I got very, very lucky. I had one huge stroke of luck in this process. And that was the month that I was starting to query my manuscript, was the same month that My Octopus Teacher came out on Netflix. And I don't know if y'all have seen this. If you haven't seen it, I highly, highly recommend it. It's a wonderful documentary. It's only about an hour and a half long, I think. And it's about a diver who has a relationship with a friendship, I should say, with a common octopus that he meets in the wild. And I feel like with so many things during COVID, it was like we were all watching this. It's like it came out and it just kind of shot to the forefront of pop culture and the sort of conversations that we were all having around TV. And so my manuscript was landing on agents' desks right at that time, which I didn't plan that, but I couldn't have planned it better if I had tried. I mean, it was hugely lucky.
Yeah, that's incredible, because really it primed the audience who they already had fallen in love with an octopus. They were mesmerized by an octopus. So that was so great for your readers, for sure.
It was like, oh, if you loved this thing, like here's the fiction version of it,
That's right.
So stars aligned.
Wow. Also, I think you had mentioned to me at a different time that you took a course in public speaking.
Not really so much well, I did. Did I put that in? It's been, I would say that like all of this has been sort of a crash course in public speaking. I did like things like, debate when I was in high school. And it's always been something that I kind of enjoyed. Like I'm a Leo. I like, give me a microphone and I'm kind of happy about that. Oh shoot, sorry.
That's amazing because
I'm sorry, my phone rang. I don't know why. I thought I had it on silent. But yeah, it's been, it's funny, writing a novel and promoting a novel are two very, very different skill sets. And particularly coming out of COVID and just like not having any real human contact for so many years. And then going from that to being, oh, well, you're going to be on TV, like you're going to be interviewed on NPR, and oh, the BBC is calling. It was like I had to really do some work on myself and watch some videos and figure it out. And my publicist helped me a lot too. But yeah, it's been wild.
yeah, I bet it's a lot of pressure to perform where you were sort of locked in a room by yourself doing your thing, and now all of a sudden you have to be out in the world. So that's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the moment where it was like, it was like, I'm going to wear jeans for the first time in however many, like, year and a half, going from that to the next month being like, oh, like I need to do a Rent the Runway to get a dress for this appearance. And like, it was just a total 180. It was a little bit wild.
Wow, amazing.
But
All
you
right.
just laughed at a bunch of the comments that have been coming, is that nobody eats octopus now after reading the book and watching the movie.
Yeah, no, I haven't eaten it in a long time either. It would not feel right to me, but I don't judge anyone, their choices. Everyone has a different line there.
Okay, so let's talk about the book and start with the setting. So the setting is in a small little town. What made you decide to set the book in this small little town, Sewell Bay?
Well, I love writing small towns. I think as a writer, there are so many advantages to setting a book in a small town that you make up. The big and obvious one being that you need to control all of the little details. No one is going to be, you're not going to be upsetting readers by, oh, that intersection is not a stoplight, it's a four-way stop, or, you just don't have to get bogged down by that sort of thing. And I think, novels that are set in big cities, that's a little bit easier for whatever reason. Maybe there's just a little bit less of a kind of focus on the details. But I love small towns because I think they're easier to write. But the other thing that I really love is just the sort of way that everyone's in everyone else's business. And obviously that's a big plot point of the book as well. Tova, the main human character, is a very private person. And she just has kind of endured living in this place where everyone is kind of always poking around and always talking. And she's got her friend, Ethan, who works at the grocery store, who likes to talk and likes to gossip. So, yeah, I don't think that would have worked in anything but a small town. I think you kind of have to have a small town in order to have that kind of vibe.
Yeah, I love a small town too. There's a lot of TV shows on Netflix that are small town, like Virgin River and all of those kind of things where there's gossip going on and you can really get to know the characters, and it's fun to read that. What about the aquarium interested you to bring that as a focal point?
So the aquarium, obviously is fictional. It's also in this fictional town, but it's pretty closely based on an aquarium that I loved to go to as a kid. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, which is a much larger city than Sewell Bay. They're not really similar, but there was this aquarium that was there when I was a kid. I think it just shut down in about 2017, replaced by a newer, fancier one. But it was this round cement building, no windows. Like it smelled like fish. Like the walls were always kind of like mysteriously damp. Like it was very cave-like. And I just loved it. Like when I was a kid, that was my favorite place to go when we went to this zoo and aquarium. And I just kind of liked how it felt more intimate than other parts of the zoo. It really kind of felt like, you could kind of peer into this secret world, like you're being let in on some special secret by being able to be so up close with these just incredible creatures. And they did have an octopus that lived there. And the new one, which is, it's the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, if anyone has been to the area, but they built this new beautiful facility a few years ago, and they have an octopus there too. And I got to visit him when we were up there visiting a family. So yeah, the specific aquarium definitely has a special place in my heart. The book is in some ways kind of like a love letter to this place that was really special to me as a child.
And now, have you ever scuba dived or snorkeled?
You know what? I have never scuba dived. I'm honestly a little bit afraid of it. And I love snorkeling, but I'm a very like float on the surface type of snorkeler. Like I get all flustered if I try to go under and it's like the tube and the water and I don't know. I'm usually happy to just kind of float on the surface and look, but I haven't been in a while. I mean, gosh, I guess, with COVID kind of disrupting a lot of the vacations over the last few years, it's been a while since I did that. Kind of itching to do it again.
Yeah, I'd like to do it again soon too. It's fun. Okay, so let's talk about everybody's favorite character, Marcellus. So I guess he came about because of the aquarium that you went to, or was there, how did you come up with the idea to make him your main character?
He really came about from a YouTube video that this was back in that kind of 2013, 14 era. I was just starting to dabble in creative writing, and I think I was in this headspace where I was kind of hunting for characters in the world around me. So like eavesdropping on people at coffee shops and just trying to find like inspiration for characters in the world around me. And I remember, I don't know what I was, probably just wasting time on the internet one afternoon, as one does, and went down this rabbit hole of octopuses for some reason, which is a delightful rabbit hole. I highly recommend it. There's a lot of material out there, but this one video at the Seattle Aquarium of a captive giant Pacific octopus that was trying repeatedly to escape from its enclosure. And I remember just thinking to myself, that would be a fun character. Like it would be an angry octopus. It would be kind of holier than thou. It would be kind of looking down upon these ridiculous humans who have the nerve to put such a majestic creature in captivity. And the voice just kind of came to me, as I mentioned earlier. It really came to me in that writing class that I took, that first one, where we had an exercise one day to write from an unusual point of view, and that was what popped into my head. So I just kind of started sketching out this curmudgeonly octopus, and it grew from there.
Wow. And how did you come up with his name?
So his name is, so I originally wanted to name him Marcus Aurelius, after the Stoic philosopher. And I thought that would be a fantastic name for an octopus, but all of my critique partners were like, Shelby, no, it's too much. Like it's kind of a mouthful. It's going to make the book seem more serious than it is. You don't want people to think this is like a philosophy book, like, try to find something a little bit lighter. So I literally just made a portmanteau of Marcus and Aurelius and mashed it up. And I also like the way it kind of rolls off the tongue. I like the us, the kind of repeated sound there. Always kind of made me happy. I think I went through a few times where I went through an exercise of thinking if there was something else that I should name him, and I always ended up coming back to Marcellus.
That's very funny. Now, the plural of octopus is octopuses. I just want to confirm that with you because people are asking, and I looked it up and I'm pretty sure that's what it is, but just to make sure.
I believe that is correct. I am not a marine biologist. I just play one when I'm writing. But yes, I think I think technically maybe either octopuses or octopi is okay, but octopuses is typically what you see like in scientific literature and that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. So I loved being able to hear on the page, because I read the book, I didn't listen, but to hear Marcellus's thoughts and his observations. And I would say that you have successfully walked a very fine line of being realistic and almost absurd in having a talking octopus. So how did you achieve that balance, which really was crucial in the success of the book, because people are loving this character and they're believing him, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is an extremely fine line. I will agree, and that was challenging. I had really good critique partners who would help me if something was going too far. They would kind of rein me in. I think because this was my first novel, and when I was writing it, I don't know that I ever really had it in my mind that it was going to be published. I was just writing a novel. I didn't know if it was going to be published. And I think that kind of gave me the freedom to not really worry too much about that. The process of editing was where a lot of that fine tuning happened. Where I gave it to friends who work in marine biology, and they were able to put me in contact with some people who, like, an organization that does octopus rescue, and they would answer some of my questions, where I really kind of reined in the Marcellus, the Marcellus universe, to make it hopefully be believable enough for readers. I remember at one point I had him operating a photocopier and then carrying a piece of paper down the hall. And my one friend who has experience in that marine bio was like, no, just no, too far.
Do that.
So yeah, I was kind of more like I asked for forgiveness rather than permission when figuring out where that line was. I just kind of didn't worry about it too much when I was drafting, which was really freeing.
I mean, would you say that most of his behavior, or how much of his behavior, is plausible?
I mean, so I wanted everything that he was doing physically to be theoretically possible. So, an octopus his size can fit through a gap that size. Like, that is possible. And if you Google it, you'll see videos of it happening, and it's incredible to watch. It just doesn't seem like it should be possible. The amount of time that he can stay out of water, the sort of, to the extent that he's sort of carrying things around or, moving about in the world. I really tried to get all of that pretty tight in terms of being realistic. The other part about his sort of mental state, or his, doing these little journal entries. I mean, obviously that is all just made up, but yeah, I wanted it to feel, if not real, at least like a little part of you wonders, like, could this be possible? Right.
Did you research mental abilities of an octopus? I mean,
Yeah, I feel like there's always articles coming out talking about octopus intelligence. There was one that I saw the other day about, it was a video of an octopus changing color as it was dreaming. And the scientist, or whoever was speaking on the video, was sort of theorizing about what the octopus might be dreaming about, based on the colors and the patterns that the octopus was presenting. So there's a lot of that sort of thing out there. I think a lot of it, in terms of the intelligence, is sort of speculated upon at this point. I think there's so much that we don't know, we, humanity, not we, us sitting here. But I think that's also what makes it such a fun type of animal to use for a character, because, I try to think sometimes, okay, if I had tried to write this book with an intelligent primate, like a gorilla or an ape or a chimpanzee, I don't think it would have worked, because we know a fair bit about how their brains work. Their brains work very similar to how our brains work. But octopuses are, they evolved on a totally different part of the evolutionary tree. Their brains are decentralized, whereas ours are more, we have a central brain. They have kind of this decentralized nervous system. They're almost like an alien. People say that all the time, and it's cliche, but it kind of rings true when you start to read about how their bodies are set up and how they tick. The other book that I read that was a great resource was the book Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery, which is a nonfiction book. Cy Montgomery is a nature journalist, and she sort of embeds herself with caretakers at aquariums and gets to know their resident octopuses. And it's a fantastic read. She's a wonderful writer, but she goes a lot into what at the time we knew. And I think the book was published in like 2016 or 17. And I feel like even since then, there's been more that has come out where people have learned more about octopuses. But she goes into some of that too in her book, which was really helpful for me.
Oh, sorry, John. Everybody really loved Marcellus, and people want to know. I know you said that you're writing another book right now, but people have asked whether you would think about doing a prequel. to the book and get a little bit more into Marcellus's story and personality, a little more focusing on him. People wanted more of him.
I know, I've heard that so many times too. And it's really funny to me because one of the big questions that my editor and I worked through when we were doing edits was how much octopus should we put in this book? And, I think there was a little bit of hesitancy on the part of the editorial team. The book was seen maybe as a little bit risky, certainly a little bit different. My publisher, Echo, they are wonderful. They publish like literary fiction a little bit more. And so this was a little bit of a, I don't want to say departure, but, it was a little bit of a different book for them to acquire. And
boy, are they happy.
yeah, they're pretty happy. We're all pretty happy. But we talked about that a lot. Like, how much is too much? Are we, you don't want to be seen as sort of too over the top or too silly or just kind of take it too far and alienate the reader or push them away. So we cut back Marcellus a little bit. And now, having seen the reaction from readers, I'm kind of wondering, well, I bet we actually could have gotten away with putting a little bit more in. It would have been okay. And there are a lot of Marcellus scenes that are sort of on the cutting room floor. When I was drafting, sometimes if I was stuck on something, trying to work my way through the plot and it wasn't going well, I would just sort of close that out, put it away, and just ask myself, well, what does Marcellus think today? And, he has an opinion on everything. And so I would write these little scenes with him just giving his opinion on whatever the humans were doing. And, I think the best of those definitely made it into the book, but there were some that didn't because they just didn't really, advance the plot or they were redundant or whatever. But a lot of discussion about that in the editorial process.
That's great. I think an octopus has that bit of mystery that a lot of other animals don't have, because we don't know everything about an octopus and we don't have the opportunity to see them that often, right? So it's a mysterious kind of animal. And then paired with, my octopus teacher coming out and people having that opportunity to see it in action, it really was perfect timing for you.
Well, and this is, my kind of layman's view on it or take on it is, when we do have the chance to study octopuses, we're studying them in captivity. And I would bet they're a little bit of a different creature in captivity than they maybe are when they're out in the wild. I mean, they're smart. They know what's going on. Had the opportunity to meet a giant Pacific octopus named Chalupa at the Milwaukee Zoo and Aquarium a few months ago, and she was not happy to meet me. She was not happy to be visited in her tank. And it was just so interesting to me that it was like, okay, she doesn't want to be studied. Like, how do you, if you were trying to study this animal, like you would really have to kind of work around their personality. Like that's going to be part of whatever you're studying. And they have really distinct personalities.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So let's talk about the human co-star. That would be Tova. First of all, I had somebody ask me, they wanted to know where her name came from. And then let's talk just a little bit about her and her place in life at this time.
Yeah. Oh gosh, naming characters is it's one of my favorite parts of writing, and it's also not one of my favorite parts of writing. Most of the time when I'm naming a character, it either pops into my head or it doesn't. In this case, it did not. I knew that I wanted her to be a Swedish lady. She's sort of loosely modeled on my late grandmother, who was this tiny little Swedish lady, very similar to Tova in many ways. Her name was Anna. So obviously I'm not going to call her Anna. And I also kind of wanted to avoid like the more kind of well-known, or I don't want to say cliche, but I didn't want to name her like Ingrid or, just what we think of when we think of a Swedish female name, particularly maybe of someone who's of that generation that would be in their 70s. And also, I mean, like, my family is Swedish and there's a lot of those names like in my family. So I was like, okay, I've got to steer clear. I'm already going to make waves probably in my family by writing about this. I don't need to make it worse by using someone's real name. So a lot of those got kind of crossed off the list. And then it was really just going down these internet lists of, women born in Sweden in the, 1940s, 1930s, however it kind of shook out with the dates at the time. And, picking something that was, definitely like a real name there, but not one of the more common ones. I don't know, I think it can also be like a Hebrew name. It's got some other roots around Europe. And I kind of liked that it was just a little bit more, not quite so cliched Swedish. It was a little bit more generic, I guess, but still not super common.
Okay, great. So when you were writing about her, did you consciously decide to make her life parallel to Marcellus in the way that they both were kind of lonely and thinking about the end of their days?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I wanted the human character to be on that same journey to a certain extent. Tova and Marcellus, and a lot of the other characters are kind of stuck in these boxes that, in Tova's case, it's a metaphorical box that she has sort of put herself in, or at least has sort of resigned to being in terms of her outlook on the world, how she sees the rest of her life going as she sort of comes into this phase of life where a lot of her friends are, moving in with their children or kind of having these big changes. Marcellus, of course, is physically stuck in a box that he would maybe rather not be stuck in. But yeah, I definitely was an intentional parallel there. And I also I spent a lot of time in aquariums, particularly in the Georgia aquarium, which is, like I mentioned, we were living in Atlanta when I first started working on this. And just, it was something about, you're sitting there in front of this huge tank. The Georgia aquarium has a massive tank that has all sorts of, the big like stingray thingies, turtles, fish, sharks, and they all kind of circle around in the same direction. And if you sit there long enough, you will see the same individual animals just come by like on the same path. And something about that really stuck with me because my grandmother was very much like that. And Tova is very much like that. It's the routine. It's keeping moving. It's sort of just, circulating on the same path that kind of goes nowhere. And it's a little bit sad when you think about it in terms of, those animals in the aquarium, that's what they do. But, I think we humans do that too. And so I also liked that there was kind of that parallel.
And then you did kind of change that feeling though, by giving them both this hope and making the story more upbeat. And then there was the mystery that sort of evolved in the story. Did you intend to have this be a mystery?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think at one point in the very, very early days when I was, writing these Marcellus scenes and working on my first 2 chapters, I somehow thought it was going to be a murder mystery. And it didn't take me very long to realize that I don't think my brain works in a murder mystery right away. Like that's a very specific genre and sort of has its specific tropes and structures, and it was not working. But I did want there to be some sort of central mystery, and that kind of evolved as I wrote it. I had a little bit of an idea of what it was going to be at the start, but as I went on, I changed a lot of it. I changed the timing of a lot of the things, of sort of who knew what when in the book. Changed that quite drastically at one point after realizing that it wasn't working how I had it. And then, I'm in awe of writers who can who can like plot out in advance the details that you need to make an effective mystery, because I kind of just plow my way through a first draft, realize how it's going to end, and then I have to go back and like plant all the little seeds to make the path make sense. I don't know how to do it any other way. I kind of wish I did.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of authors that I've talked to all write in that kind of way, just sort of haphazard. They're pantsers, right? They just write it, and however it comes out, they tweak it and shape it as it goes. That those always tend to be the authors that I enjoy reading the most. So there must be something to it. It must be some kind of unusual creative ability to come up with the story and write it sort of, just as it comes in your head, and then work it through.
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I will say this, it's fun. For me, it's fun to write that way. It's sort of like being the reader when you're reading a book and you're turning the pages, trying to figure out what happens. And that's sort of how it is when you're writing it. It's like, well, I'm writing my way through this. I'm going to see what happens. And then when something falls into place, it feels really good.
Yeah. And your book is unique in the way that there's like these little clues, and we learn all the secrets before the characters do, which is different than it's different than other kinds of books where you're, learning it up until the end. It's kind of nice to be the voyeur and to see the whole story and to see how the characters get the clues as they go along.
Yeah, a lot of my close critique partners write romance and rom-com. And there's sort of that trope in romance novels, I feel like this, where, the sort of series of missed connections, right? Where you have two characters who you really want them to get together and they keep just missing the opportunity or the truth. And so I kind of wanted to play with that trope a little bit with Tova and Cameron in this book.
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things that I was thinking about while I was reading it is that Tova and Marcellus, they share their thoughts to each other, but we don't really know if either one of them totally understands what the other one is saying, right? But they're communicating with each other. And I'm wondering how you feel about the purpose of telling, of having that entity receiving your thoughts, and if that's just as important as someone actually listening.
Well, I think in Tova's case, she has plenty of human people around her who, are sort of willing to listen and willing to help her. But the problem is they kind of want to fix her, right? And what she just sort of needs is someone to, just listen without judgment, without without kind of smothering her. I mean, she's a little bit of a very sensitive person in that way, where, that she kind of needs this other party who can't respond in order to feel comfortable opening up. And it's a little bit ironic to me because I feel like Marcellus is the most judgmental character in the whole book. I mean, he just has no bounds of what he will judge when it comes to humans. But that's what Tova gets from him, is sort of this listening without judgment. I know this is maybe kind of silly, but I kind of feel that way with my cats sometimes. Like when I'm really frustrated and, I just kind of need to vent, or I'm sad and I just need, an animal to pet and put on my lap. Like, don't try to fix me. I think there's a very human tendency that we always want to kind of try to fix each other, or help too much, when sometimes just listening is really what is needed.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why I think people say a dog is a man's best friend, because, people talk to their dogs and they say, that's my best friend. I tell them everything and they understand me, and we don't really know, but it's just the act of telling and being able to, open up without having any response. And it's valuable for humans anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, people go to therapy and you have the therapist who just kind of listens and says, oh, I see. It's kind of like,
Right.
okay, well, sometimes that's what you need.
That's probably more frustrating though, because you expect answers from a person, from an animal.
Well, yeah, eventually. It's funny. I just saw in the comment box about Tova and Marcellus that, can Marcellus understand Tova? And I think, yes, it should be absolutely clear that I think Marcellus can understand human voice and what humans are saying, but he can't respond, except in his little missives that he's putting out to the universe. It's always interesting to me to think about who Marcellus is talking to when he's writing. I mean, he's sort of talking to the reader, but I'm not sure if he realizes it's a reader. He's just kind of putting it out there. A little bit the way there's kind of the sci-fi trope where there's a man stranded on a distant planet somewhere and is just sending out his daily transmission, hoping that someone might hear it. And I kind of feel like that's what Marcellus is doing as well.
Yeah. So how did you decide to have Marcellus recognize the connection between Tova and Cameron?
That was another one. We're talking about sort of walking those tricky lines. I worked really hard on that chapter to hopefully get the right balance of what, if you think of the most observant person you could possibly imagine, and that's sort of Marcellus, right? He is just so keenly observant, and he has this like photographic memory. And what could you tell about two people? And I think the detail that I liked the most was he could tell that they kind of walked the same. And that's a detail that I've noticed. Sometimes you're walking in the park behind a parent and a child, and they just kind of like have the same way that they carry themselves. And so that was a detail that was one of my favorite details that came out of that. Yeah, and then the rest of it was just sort of him, I think, caring for the first time. I don't know that he would have put as much effort into trying to solve this mystery if he hadn't developed that connection with Tova. So I think the fact that he cares is unusual for him, and he can use all of these bits from his memory, the memories from when he was on the bottom of the ocean, when he was a young octopus before he was captured, and sort of sync them up with the things that he's observing now to make those connections.
Right. Now, in the story, did you plant the clues about Cameron's father on purpose in strategic places, adding them in, or for a slower reveal, or did it just come naturally, like those little clues?
I think I probably planted the majority of them, after I had gotten to the end and realized, I kind of always knew how that was going to end with those two characters. But yeah, I think on editing, I did quite a bit of going back and massaging that. Yeah, I just don't think that I would have thought of it the first time around,
Right. I mean, there's lots of little details, which I reread the book, and there are certain parts where I'm like, oh, that's a good clue. It's they're fun to catch as they pop in.
Somebody said the driver's license and the house key.
Yeah.
They're great.
Well, the driver's license, that was the one where I was like, oh, Marcellus is going to make a copy of this. And I was like, no. So then I had to figure out how to have the actual driver's license be there instead of a copy of it. All those little logistical things. So much fun.
Right. And then there was one chapter of foreshadowing when it's a chapter that Tova is thinking about how, what if her son had become a father, and how great would have that would have been, and she would have had a grandchild, and that whole chapter, I loved that. It's like 2 pages, and I was like, oh my gosh, because I don't remember what it was like when I first read it, but when I was rereading the book, I was excited to get to that chapter.
Yeah, I remember adding that chapter in and really liking that chapter as well. Tova doesn't do a lot of that. She's not a person who sort of wallows in the
Right.
could have beens. So for her to permit herself to do that was really fun to write, and kind of made me feel kind of warm inside. And then I think that just came out of like, you have to be believable. It's like, well, would she really not have thought of this? And so I was like, well, no, she would have thought of it, but she would have dismissed it because it just, no, too good to be true. That never would have happened. It's, kind of back to kind of being a little bit mopey about it.
Yeah, she seems like the kind of person that would have thought of a lot of things, but wouldn't have shared a lot of things
Yeah.
and just put it in the back burner. But this was like a tiny little window into one of her thoughts that was, right at the perfect time to just plant that seed for all of us too. Now let's talk about Ethan,
Yeah.
and let's talk about his Grateful Dead t-shirt. Where did you come up with that idea?
So again, I mentioned
Yeah,
a
probably
lot of
touched
my
reading, did I?
critique partners
I
write
guess you-
romance, and I feel like romance books and movies, there's always a grand gesture. And I remember sharing a draft with my critique partners and having them say, you need a grand gesture, like Tova needs to do a grand gesture for Ethan. And, in romance, it's often like, it's the guy at the window with the boombox. It's, the note cards that say, I love you, whatever that was in Love Actually. But, my book isn't a romance, so it's not going to be that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to think of something that was like, something that could happen that was just relatively ordinary and small, but that could be really meaningful and impactful to those two characters. And it was also just a chance to kind of infuse it with some comedy, which, I always love adding in humor, especially in books when things are getting heavy and you're dealing with heavy topics and
It's a
people are.
small one. Yeah.
But yeah, it was fun to write. And there was actually, that concert did actually happen. I kind of did my homework on that and made sure it would make sense. So
That's so funny. Yeah, I love that whole section there. Now, what about Avery?
yeah.
So she owns a paddle shop. Where'd you get that idea?
Oh gosh.
And a little about her character.
Yeah, well, so I loved I wanted to give Cameron a little bit of a romance in an additional reason for him to want to stay in Washington. And I think, I spent a lot of time in little towns around the Puget Sound area when I was a kid, and I feel like there's always some sort of kayak shop there. And so I just thought, well, that'd be cool if she owned it. I really, she's kind of everything that Cameron is not. She's got her act together. She's successful. She owns this successful store. She's got a kid. I really wanted to give her a teenage kid so that he could see that teenage kid. He sees himself reflected in her son and is like, oh, that's not a good look. But yeah, she was a lot of fun to write. She is another one of those characters. I think Ethan falls in this category too, where I really want, there were so many scenes that I wrote that I cut because they just didn't advance the plot. And, I would love to spend more time with those characters. But, when you've got a big cast, you've got to kind of, the side characters kind of had to play a little bit of a smaller role in order to keep it in word count.
Yeah, it's true. They are great supporting characters. It would be fun to know more about them. Like you could have different stories on all these different characters. I mean, they're all really interesting characters. So you did a great job. I loved it. Let's talk about the pace. So it feels like the pace picks up as we're going through the book and we're sort of racing against the clock. We don't want anything to happen to Marcellus before, they find out what he wants them to find out. So do you think about pace when you're writing?
I don't think about it too much on that first draft. Partly because, and I feel like I know this now, having been through one book, just like so much of this stuff is going to get rearranged. We did a lot of rearranging. I have to say, I will never write another book that has like day, whatever marked in the pages like that, because that was kind of a nightmare to edit. You kept moving stuff around and then it would throw off the timeline, and you have Marcellus in here saying it's day whatever, and then the rest of the chapters sort of have to fall in line with that. It was like my editor was pretty frustrated with me by the end of it because it just kept being off and we kept having to tweak it.
So how do you do that? Like this is the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then when you go to revise, then you put the days in? I mean, how will you do that next time?
Oh, well, I will be more vague. So instead of having a specific day, it'll be, not so,
Spring.
yes, exactly. I think at one point I had the whole thing printed out and I had it like laid across my, like chapter by chapter across my living room and then turning the corner into the dining room, to try to, sort out, make sure that everything was in the right order and had the right kind of spacing between it. But I'm not a super detail oriented person, so that was really hard for me to get my brain to get on board with that. I think for me, the beginning and the end are kind of easy in terms of the pace. The beginning, because you're getting everything set up and you're laying out the stakes and it kind of feels exciting. The end, I feel like, both as a writer and as a reader, you get to that point in the book where you can kind of feel that acceleration happening, as you get into the last, 20% of the book, maybe. And it's the middle that's hard, really.
Right.
I think they call it the murky middle or the saggy middle. And I notice it as a reader sometimes too. Even in really great books, you can kind of sense that point in the middle where maybe it's sagging a little bit. So that was where I put most of my attention on the pacing, on revising, was in those middle sections, making sure it had the kind of the right balance of sort of the humor and the kind of background development versus like having things happen that would keep the story moving, and raising new questions to readers. I always like to think of, well, what questions do readers have at this particular time? And if you get to a section where there's not really any questions that would be on the reader's mind, that's probably a problem, because that's what keeps us turning the pages.
Right. So when I read, I always love when I come upon the title of the book in the copy. And you mentioned the title 2 different times. How did you decide on it? And how does that work to pick a title?
Well, I actually didn't have a title for a lot of the process of this. It wasn't until I was getting ready to query it to agents and, writing my query letter and thinking, I should probably have a title. It was just saved on my computer as Marcellus, V12 dash final, final into infinity. But yeah, I did an exercise that a writing friend gave to me that basically sort of asks you these questions about your book. It asks you questions about other titles of other books that you like. And then it has you kind of mine through your book for like favorite sentences, favorite things that characters are doing. And it lays all these out in kind of a grid and has you put them together, like mash them up in different ways, with the idea that you can get a title out of that. And I didn't make it all the way through the exercise. I got maybe about a third of the way through and came upon something where I had pulled out Remarkably Bright Creatures and just kind of knew. I was like, okay, I think that's going to be the title. That pretty much says it.
I didn't know that there was a formal exercise that you could do. That's very cool to know that you have that tool for the next time.
Yeah, for sure. It was time consuming. I think I spent like a day.
Right. And you only did a third of it.
Yeah.
Shelby, somebody saw there's a book behind you on the shelf with the horse toy, and they wanted to know if that's a foreign version of the book or.
Yeah. So there's a few of them.
So how did you decide on the different covers too? What to include on the different covers?
Things falling down. I actually don't get to decide. They sort of send them to me. This is Italy. It's got this really cool gold foil. And yeah, they just kind of send them, they send it to me for approval. I don't think I've ever not approved one. I kind of trust that they're going to know what's going to sell in their market. This is Germany, a beautiful kind of pinkish reddish octopus that wraps around. And they change the title too sometimes on foreign editions. This German title is Love Has 8 Arms, which I think is kind of cool.
Wow.
This is, I think, Hungary, similar to Germany. And then the outlier, this is the UK edition. They went with a totally different direction, using the Dala horse rather than the octopus. So yeah, it's always interesting to see what they come up with. I think that the US cover art, the one that you guys are probably familiar with, is just absolutely amazing, but they're all pretty amazing in their own way.
I love this one so much.
The orange, just it's a good orange. It's a
Yeah.
good color combo.
Just the whole combination and the scene. I love it. It's beautiful. It makes a difference. The cover makes a difference.
It really does. And I was so glad that they went with kind of a more literal cover. I feel like there's been a lot of covers lately that are just like a pattern. And they're really pretty, but they don't really tell you anything about what the book's about. And, I think with this book, I really wanted to be upfront with readers that like this book, it has an octopus narrator, so no surprises.
Yeah, no, it's great. The ending of your book, was it a coincidence that Marcellus and Eric both ended up in the same bay, or was that planned all
Oh, no.
along? Did you
That
always...
was one of the few things that I knew from the beginning, was that didn't quite know how it was going to happen. I didn't have the logistics worked out, but I knew that Marcellus, before, he was not going to die in that aquarium. He was going to end up in the sea, and that Tova would have enough of a role in it that she would see it that way, that, he's going to be with Eric, like, they're together. So yeah, I didn't know a whole lot when I started out, but I did know that.
So it did end on an upbeat, kind of hopeful note. And I'm assuming you wanted it to be a positive ending.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, writing a lot of it during the pandemic, the first few months of 2020, especially, I think probably nudged it in maybe an even more kind of happy direction. Just, everything was so bleak, and it was kind of like, well, I just need something happy.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably good for you to write something happy, but even more so for the reading population who was desperate in, reading books that made them feel good and kind of lost in a different world. And, this book became a huge book club book.
Yeah.
So it makes it easier to recommend a book like this to friends and family if, it's not going to have a depressing kind of feel overall. So that was a good choice.
Yeah. I really did want to write kind of a book for everyone. It's made me so happy to hear of people, sharing the book among generations. So like, sharing it with my mom or my grandma, or, just it's the sort of book that, like, yeah, anyone can read it. It's PG-13. It's, it's accessible to anyone.
Yeah, I actually have some friends here today, and their mothers are also here. So we have multi-generational readers in this group here too. So that's kind of
wonderful. I love it.
yeah.
And everybody's writing your praises in the comments, how much they
Aw.
love this book. It's been one of their best books of the year. Somebody also wants to know, and this is always a question that comes up, is what are you reading now?
Oh gosh. I just got a new book to read for a blurb. But the name is escaping me, so I won't share that one. I was rereading this yesterday. This is a new book of poetry by Kate Baer. I'm doing an event with her tomorrow night. Like I get to be the host, like I get to be the you at that event. So I'm pretty excited for that. And I was just reading through this again last night and this morning, and her poetry is so wonderful. I'm not a huge poetry person, but my gosh, her poems just hit. I mean, they're like accessible, just so kind of searing in a good way. So yeah, I just finished that. I've got to pick, I'm kind of between fiction books right now. I finished Kevin Wilson's new one, Now Is Not the Time to Panic, which was awesome. A pretty short little fun read, a kind of coming age misfit type story. But yeah, I've got to mind my shelf for what's next.
I think you had mentioned to me that you read The Many Daughters of Afong Moy.
Yeah, that's another really good one.
Yeah, I read that one too. I really liked that.
Yeah, Jamie Ford and I share an agent, so I actually got to have coffee with him when he was in Chicago for the Printers Row Lit Fest. We were both a part of that, and it was really fun talking to him about sort of genre. His book is also sort of in this between space genre-wise, where it's it's got some historical fiction to it. it's got some sort of like future dystopia-ism to it. You know, it's literary fiction, but it's, you know, it's very readable. It's funny at times. And so we were just, it was really fun talking to him about how both of our books sort of exist in this kind of book club space where, you know, they don't necessarily belong to one genre, but have elements of many.
Yeah, he also could write more about all of his characters. Like he just gives you a little bit about each character, and he could really write a book about each one of those characters.
He's so good with voice. I mean, I feel like, you know, in Daughters, it was just like every chapter where it'd be sort of, you know, you're in a different era and a different character. It was like he just nailed the way of speaking of each of those women. It was amazing.
Yeah. Do you write every day? What is your writing process?
You know, I don't. I've seen that advice many times, and I think it's probably good advice. Maybe it's advice that I need to take. You know, I try to kind of touch writing every day, but sometimes that might look like editing, or maybe doing a character sketch, or, you know, it's not necessarily like word count activities. Although when I was in sort of drafting mode, this sort of 9-month intense period where I was really trying to get this done, I wrote probably pretty much every day. I don't think I took a whole lot of days completely off. I tend to be a little bit more like, I do better, you know, writing intensely for maybe 2 or 3 days and then kind of backing off for a little bit, versus, you know, some writers will just write like, I'm going to write 500 words every day. And if you do the math, you can like 500 words a day to a novel in a pretty reasonable amount of time. But I have trouble doing that because I feel like once I get into it and get kind of in the headspace, I want to stay there, which is also why I tend to write at night. You know, it was a habit that sort of started because I was writing so much of this during the pandemic when my kids were home, and it was just like impossible to get anything done during the day.
How old are your kids?
They're 6 and 8 now, so they were 3 and 5, you know, at the time when I was drafting this.
That's
you know,
hard.
my 5-year-old's like, you know, virtual kindergarten, and like, I don't know, my husband was on conference calls, you know, all just like, it was so chaotic. But night, the house was quiet, so that's, you know, I would just stay up really late writing, and I've kind of kept that habit because I like that there's not as much of a backstop on it. You know, when I try to write during the day now, I find myself, you know, distracted not only by, oh, well, there's, you know, dishes in the sink, and, you know, the email box is chiming, and, you know, there's a package being delivered, but just also by the fact that, you know, I have other things going on. It's like, oh, I have 2 hours before I have to pick my kids up or whatever. Just that sort of looming end point makes it hard for me to get fully sort of into a creative place in my head. So yeah, I pull late nights.
And now you're working on another book now.
I am. Yeah, it's pretty early still, but I'm trying to get it done. I'm actually going to go next month and spend 5 days by myself writing, and I'm so excited for it.
Where are you going to go?
I'm going to go out to Montana, actually. There's a spot out there that we spent some time last summer, and the second book that I'm trying to write is sort of set in that part of the country. So I'm going to just kind of immerse myself in it, and yeah, hopefully get some good writing done.
And will there be a non-human character in that book?
There is at least one character who may not be human. But it's pretty early, so we'll see how it shakes out.
It definitely works, so you should go for it.
Yeah, you know, I like that space where it's kind of, you know, I like books that have a little bit of the fantastical in them. I think they're really fun. So
it does open the door for a little bit of different creativity that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I just think if it's done well and done right, it's another opportunity for humor. You know, anytime you have a non-human character, I feel like that's an opportunity to really examine humanity in a way that you can't through the eyes of a human character, which I also think is really fun and impactful.
Yeah, I agree. I spoke to Bonnie Garmus, who wrote Lessons in Chemistry, and she has a dog in her book that, you know, it's an interesting character, and that dog is very smart and knows all kinds of things that we wouldn't know that the dog knew. So it was fun to learn about that character as well.
Oh, I love that book and that character, 630.
Yeah, that's
He's
right.
just always wondering why these ridiculous humans are doing what they're doing. He and Marcellus would get along really well.
They'd be good friends, for sure.
You know what else somebody had said way back, that Tova, and it's funny because you said about your Swedish background, if you're probably familiar with Frederick Bachman,
Yeah.
he said that a man called Ove and Tova and Ove could have gotten together.
Yeah, that's been it's one of my favorite books of all time. I'm so excited for the movie that's coming out.
Yeah.
I think it looks like it's going to be really good. But yeah, Frederick Bachman has a wonderful, wonderful way of drawing characters and using humor to tackle sort of difficult topics.
He made his curmudgeonly character a man, and you made yours an octopus, but there's similarity there.
Definitely.
All right. Are there any other questions from the audience? Nancy, do you have any?
I think we pretty much covered most of the questions. So this is really, really enjoyable. I mean, so interesting.
Yes, a few people are asking about a movie.
Oh, we'll talk about them. Yeah, so we actually sold the option, which is really exciting. And that just got done like in the last couple of weeks, which was really, really thrilling. So of course, that's just an option. A lot of books get optioned, and the movie doesn't necessarily get made. It's just sort of the first step of a really long ladder. And Hollywood moves slowly, so who knows? But it's really exciting to think about. Yeah, I think it would
Everybody
be.
wants to know who your dream cast would be, and
Yeah, it's hard for me to, you people who've listened to the audiobook, it's hard for me to imagine anyone other than Michael Urie being Marcellus, but I think it would be a really fun role for a lot of really great voice actors. And I'm so curious as to how they would, do the CG or the puppetry or how that would work out. It'll be really fascinating to see if it actually does get made, how they handle that.
Yeah, that part of it seems like it would take a lot of technology and maybe a lot of time to make that work visually.
Yeah. I mean, Marcellus doesn't have a lot of page time, but I think you would really have to make sure that you did what was there really well, so it wasn't like cheesy. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to see. I love the idea of the Tova role for an actress of that age in Hollywood. There are good roles, but there aren't that many like leading roles. So I really hope if it does go forward that is just a great opportunity for an actress to take.
I kind of see like a Blythe Danner.
Oh yeah, that could work. It's interesting because Tova is so stoic that it would be, I mean, I'm not an actor, but I would think it would be a little bit of a challenging role to play, maybe because you'd have to be able to convey so much with just sort of a look, and really.
Meryl Streep.
Yeah. I thought of her too.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of great actresses that I think could really do a lot with it. But we'll see. I mean, fingers crossed. If it does happen, I'm preparing myself for the fact that it's going to be a long road. So we'll see.
Right. So how can we keep up with you to follow and to find out, what's next, when the next book's coming out, and if there's a movie and all of that? How do we follow you?
I'm most active on Instagram, and it's just Shelby Van Pelt Writes. A little bit less so on Twitter, but my Twitter is just Shelby Van Pelt. I have a website, which is shelbyvanpelt.com, although I don't update it as often as I think my publicist and her team would like. But it does have like upcoming events and things like that on there. So that is available as well.
All right, great. So everyone follow Shelby on Instagram, and also if you have a chance, go on to Goodreads, because the book is what is it? It's nominated for Best Debut and also Best Fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so you can vote.
You could vote twice and not be doing anything illegal. So
I voted today. So
thank you.
But yeah, that would be great for the book. So, and for you. So
Oh, thank you
everybody
so
should
much.
go into that.
And
And-
also, if you want to keep up with the Facebook group Westport CT Book Chat and Swap and Book Nation by Jen, you all have gotten her email in order to get on this Zoom. So, you know, you'll keep getting the newsletter and you'll see, and we'd love some recommendations on other authors that you'd like to bring to the forefront. But Shelby, this was incredible.
Oh, and one more thing, our next book talk, just real quick, is this book, The Color of Ice by Barbara Lynn Probst. And that is on December 6th. It's a great book. So put that on your list. You can learn about it more on Book Nation by Jen. All right, thank you so much, Shelby. This has been really great. I hope everyone has all their questions answered, and we are wishing you good luck and everything moving forward.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great night, everyone.
All right, take care. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.